Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. So we will be discussing managing cash flow during a crisis. I just wanted to welcome everyone and tell you thank you for joining us. I do want to let you know that the audience is on mute. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar via the question and chat feature. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Kayla Gentry. I am the Marketing and Project Coordinator for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership of Louisiana, or MEPAL, as we like to say. Before we get started, I do want to give you a little overview of our organization if some of you may be unaware of us. So MEPAL is part of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and we are part of a national network of, we work with U.S. manufacturers to create and retain jobs, increase profits, save time and money, develop new customers, and expand into new markets. So as you can see on your screen, by national network, we do mean that we have access to over 1,500 experts through the MEPs located throughout the nation, including Puerto Rico. MEPAL is also part of the Louisiana Community and Technical College system. They manage all 12 community colleges throughout the state. As such, we're better able to cover the state of Louisiana as a whole with project managers located at community colleges throughout the state. The webinar today will be presented by Miriam Russell. She is our Louisiana Delta Community College MEPAL project manager. As an LDCC MEPAL project manager, she handles clients within the northern region of the state. Miriam has owned a manufacturing facility, retail, wholesale, and a consulting business. She has an MBA, is a certified economic developer, and a Ramsey Solutions financial management coach. Miriam has dealt with being in business when a sudden and unforeseen event occurs. Throughout the life of this business, she maintained her cash flow records on a daily basis. Miriam eventually closed the business when it became clear that there was no way to survive, considering the cost of labor in China versus the cost of labor in the United States. Her cash flow records made it clear that it was time to walk away. Miriam will now walk you through a cash flow budget and cash flow analysis during this uncertain time for your business. Miriam, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. This is our first webinar, so bear with us. There might be a couple of glitches here and there. We just want to give you, just start out with a little introduction about how in the world did we come up with the topic of cash flow during a crisis. Within days of the COVID shutdown and businesses being asked to lay off or to being declared non-essential businesses, we began asking the question, what are our manufacturers going to need during this time? What can we help them with? And we talked about some of the standard manufacturing extension partnership training, such as Lean and ISO and 5S, and possibly some food-based. But as the days progressed, it became very obvious that our manufacturers at that time were very involved in shutdowns and social distancing and customer outreach, making sure things were good with your customers, and basically the hygiene issues that have gone with this whole thing. And within a few days of that, it became more and more obvious that they are very tied up with payroll protection plan applications, economic injury disaster loans, and SBA 7A loans. We had many of our manufacturers calling us and asking us for guidance or assistance or someone to forward them to, which was very helpful to be able to do that. We were glad we could. After the first month, we came back to how do we help our manufacturers? And based on my personal background and what Kayla just went over with you, I knew that when I was in a crisis mode on 3 different occasions with my business, that cash flow was what carried me through. The monitoring of my cash flow was what kept me steadied as best I could be, and helped me always see exactly where I was and what was happening with the business. I had a cut and sew business, and it was primarily contract at that time, but I was developing my own line. I had about 30 employees. It was first affected when NAFTA went into effect. Within 2 weeks of NAFTA taking over, I lost 95% of my contract business, which again was the majority of my business. Within that 2-week period, I was told by my customer to pack up, load up everything that was cut, that was ready to go, that was in process. And oddly enough, we were making surgical uniforms and masks, which I consider to be pretty ironic during this time. Down the road a few years, we were doing contract work for a company. They were getting their goods from China. There was a dock strike in Los Angeles. Their goods sat on the dock for almost 2 months. They got wet. They were molded. By the time we got them, it was almost time for finished product to be out the door. Carried through that, injected more personal funds. And then 6 years later, when 9/11 hit, we were again doing contract work, and we were doing it for a company that was getting their goods out of Pakistan. Within the week of 9/11, a trade embargo was passed on all Middle Eastern countries, and consequently, none of those goods could get here. I applied for and received an economic injury disaster loan. They gave me part of it. They chose not to give me additional fundings. I went to Dallas and met with them, and they said, no, we just can't. So on my drive back to Monroe, Louisiana, I began the process of how I was going to shut it down. And it took me about 1.5 years to 2 years to get to that point. Okay. We're going to get rid of me right now, and we're going to concentrate on PowerPoints. Again, this is managing cash flow during a crisis webinar. And I'm going to pose what would seem to be a very, very elementary question to you that was posed to me in my graduate MBA class by a very good professor, excellent professor, Dr. Caldwell. He asked what we considered was kind of a silly question: what is the purpose of a business? And all of us brilliant MBAs said, well, that's to increase profit or to increase sales or to increase net income. Dr. Caldwell looked right back at us and he said, the purpose of a business is to maximize cash flow for the owner. You must always know that. You must always keep that in your mind. You can only deposit and write a check. And keep in mind, when I say write a check, I know we're in a different time and place now, so that could be a online transaction of the cash the business generates and is placed in the bank by the owner. That's it, 100%. It is very simple. Cash flow is cash in and cash out. In business, you can look at many barometers. Your CPA, your banker can look at your income statement and it says you're making money and showing a profit. But you know that you can't write a check that won't bounce off 4 walls. Cash flows, income statements, and balance sheets are all critical tools used to monitor your business. But the difference between these 3 tools and the use of all 3 is a totally different webinar. A cash flow is a gauge for daily, weekly, monthly, and annual use and for projecting cash availability. It is critical for planning, for decision making about priorities in your business, for spending priorities. Should you invest now in inventory and hold off on a new machine? For growth, can you afford to grow? We'll look at this closer later and you'll see what I mean by can you afford to grow. Expansion, can you afford an expansion and will it justify the expenditure? Reduction, do you need to just pull back, cut back, and rein in everything as it is? Investment, are you in a position to invest in equipment? Will it provide the needed return on investment? Survival. Can you survive under the current circumstances? Or shutdown? Do you need to, and should you start planning a shutdown? Okay, let's take a look at an annualized cash flow that is designed for planning and analysis. Okay, this is a tool that I have used for over 30 years. It was first put into play by the SBA back in the mid-80s. There are lots of formats, and you can go online and find cash flows, projections, and you can find many things that are helpful. To me, this one is the one that has always helped me. It's always been the most logical, and it's always been just basically the simplest and most basic to use. When you're doing a cash flow, you should do one 12 months in advance. That gives you an overview of your expenditures through the year. When do I make payments? When are my big expenditures due? When do I have to pay big tax bills? When do I have to pay insurance that I'm on a biannual, pay twice a year my insurance? You need to always be looking out there and planning at every step of the way. And how do you do that? Well, many people would think that what I'm about to show you is very, very, very too elementary. But I can tell you from having done it, it was the one thing that kept me stabilized when I was in such a bind and had to know what was happening. And that is, I kept a cash flow on a daily basis, every day. And I know it's basically just keeping a checkbook. It truly is. But when you lay it out like this and you look at where the money is being spent, and you look at the trends from week to week, why are things always better on Wednesday? Why do I have, I know that I'm going to have a big expenditure every Friday because that's when I make payroll. And you're constantly looking at it and monitoring it. And you go in and you fill in every one of these, every day. You keep it, you move it forward to the next week. Your ending cash flow becomes your beginning cash flow of the next week. And then you need to go ahead and remember when I talked about those big expenditures, go ahead and determine when the 15th of the month is, especially if it's a quarterly, when you have to make quarterly payroll taxes, and go ahead and plug those numbers in, because when they're coming, rent, has to be paid. That your loan has to be paid back on a certain days. Get those plugged in. Let's go and let's do a poll right now. Kayla, can you get that set up for us?
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. So do you currently prepare an annual cash flow projection for your business? And it's a simple yes or no. Go ahead and put those in. It is anonymous. I'm going to give this about a minute and a half. I just want to get some answers from you guys, and then we'll discuss. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a few more seconds if you want to get your final answers in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. And I'm going to share the poll results here. It looks like 91% of you said no, you do not currently prepare a cash flow, and 9% of you said yes. Miriam, you can go ahead.
Okay, can you pull up my PowerPoint for me, Kayla?
Sure. Give me just a second here.
Okay. Now, let's ask, where is your business in this current crisis? Has it been in a very difficult or disastrous position? Is the cash, has it just stopped flowing like it is very standard and normal for you? I've been reading about industries negatively affected. Luxury goods have apparently been decimated. People are afraid to buy luxury products. The confectionery industry has been hurt very, very hard. Mars Candy Bars family, their net worth is down 4.3 billion. And another odd one that kind of struck me is coca leaves are down 75%. This is what they use to make cocaine. And since the borders are sealed, they can't move the stuff. Now let's look at whether has this current crisis brought you prosperity? Are you a business that made valves that you found out could be utilized in respirators, or just with a few little changes they could be used? Some companies that did very well during this were people who made puzzles. Saw the other day were Smucker's Gems and Jellies. Their sales were up 72% and peanut butter was up 57%. And they are owned by the same parent company. And the assumption is that there's a lot of folks sitting at the house eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Pharmaceuticals industries are up, and even saw where there was an opportunity for a company that came up with a virus resistant paint. Or has it been business as usual? This is pretty rare. Most of the time, our businesses have had some type of interruption because their employees had to stay at home. Maybe kids were out of school and they had to be there with them. Or there were a lot of supply chain disruptions, and the logistics issues that occurred during all this made supply chain very difficult. Or are you still in a position where you are unsure? You may seem not to have been affected yet, but you also know that you had orders in the pipeline when this struck, and they stayed relatively steady, but now they're slowing, and you don't know if they'll continue to slow or not. So let's look at today. Let's ask yourself, where is your business today? Would you consider your business position to sink, to struggle, to float, or to fly? And before we get too deep into where you currently fit, let's take a step back, because this is very important. Look at where you were in your business before the crisis. Were you just doing great? Were things going great? Or were you just paying the bills, and had you already been struggling? This point right here is very critical. Were you already struggling? Did you have plans for growth? Were you considering opening or increasing a line of credit, or did you need to add to your current line of credit? Were you looking at the need for a long-term loan? Were you looking at a plant expansion or a major fixed asset acquisition? At this point, do you need to reevaluate? And when do you reevaluate? When you do, you're going to need to factor in a lot of unknowns. And I know many of you have been looking at this and thinking of this, but let's just talk it through to see whether any of this brings more to your mind. One of the unknowns is, what is going to happen to our economy? Who's not asking that question? Will your employees return to work? Or will they wait out the unemployment setup? Or will they not be able to return to work because they had a very low immune system or something to start with, and they're afraid to come back to the workforce? Here's something you might want to really be considering. Will there be variations in seasonal demand? And what I mean by that is, let's listen to this example. Let's say you manufacture Christmas decorations. You do a few Easter and a few Halloween, but Christmas is your make it and break it season. Well, in January and February, you were down for the count on Christmas. You were looking at what might happen next year, but things had not gone into action yet. And in March, it was about the same story. You know that you really won't start getting orders until June, because June is when they have the major markets in the Dallases and the Atlantas and Chicagos and New Yorks. And that's when people will start placing orders. So you really don't know. And you're going to have to ask yourself, are my people going to consider Christmas decorations that luxury good where the demand went down? So will the demand for your product increase or decrease? Will we have another shutdown in the fall? That's the question that keeps popping up with everybody. And when will things get back to normal? And yeah, we're about tired of asking those questions, but as a business person, they've got to be right there in front of you all the time. But you need to just remember, we have always lived in a world of unknowns. We just have to add a few more factors to think about now. Okay, now let's look at how your cash flow will either help you. Will you be able to, will it help you to survive? Have you closely monitored and adapted during the crisis? Will you be able to move your business forward from where you were today and what you project will happen where you are today? Will it help you to decide if you need to change operations or your entire business model? That may be absolutely necessary for some of you. Can it help you decide to expand, improve, and to prosper? Or do you need to cut back based on what your cash flows are telling you? Will your cash flow position tell you or help you to make a decision to keep your business open or to close? And is bankruptcy an option or a necessity? If so, you need to begin that planning process now. Let's take another poll. Kayla, can you put up that next poll?
Okay, we're launching the poll now. I did see where a couple of you are having issues with the poll. I see some of you are able to get your answers in. So to the ones that are having some issues, I apologize for that. We'll work on that next time. And Miriam, you should be able to see the results on this one. I'll launch that in just a minute. Let's give everyone a minute to get their answers in. We're going to give you guys about 10 more seconds to get your final answers in.
Okay, I'm looking at the poll results and I'm very sorry for those of you who it has had a negative effect on. I have been in your boat and I do know where you are, and I do know that you're in a situation where you're doing all you can to work through it right now, and maybe I can give you a few little tips that might help you. Now let's get back to those spreadsheets again. And let's see how a crisis can affect a business positively or negatively. Okay, let's get back to those spreadsheets again. And let's see how a crisis can affect a business positively or negatively, and both businesses end up in the same boat from a cash flow perspective. All right, let's look at this. I'm going to show you a business that has been through difficult times during COVID. And this is an abbreviated example, but things can happen this quickly. I know, remember me talking about in 2 weeks, I lost 95% of my business. So things can actually happen this quickly. You did your estimates from that sheet that I showed you first. And now you've had the opportunity over a 5-month period to start filling in some of the actual expenditures. Let's look at what happened. You pulled this from your ending cash flow last year, and you began placing your actual numbers in there this year. We're going to assume that we're looking at 2020, and that January and February were relatively normal. So we're going to go through the process. Well, you started out a little tight on cash flow because you had estimated 10,000, but it was 1,000. And things got good because your cash sales were 58 and you had estimated 48. And also your credit account collections were up from what you had estimated. So you're starting out with 79,000 available in cash flow when you had estimated 72.5. Well, you stayed about right with what you had, right on target with what you had estimated, but this was January and you had payroll taxes due and they were a little bit higher than you expected, so you had to plug that number. Now, remember, you did some of these across the board, and yep, sure enough, rent was 3,000 across the board all the way, and you did your interest expense payment that you pulled off of your amortization schedule from your loan, and that went right hand in hand with what you had estimated because you knew what your numbers were going to be. And then you just looked on down and you made your loan payment, and you ended with a 76.50 in a cash flow position, which is brought up to the beginning of February at 76.50. This is what you've got in the bank cash. And here we go. Things were just about what you had estimated. As a matter of fact, they were looking up because your sales, your estimate was 55,000, your actual sales were 64. And the same, you were up a little bit on your credit collections. Well, when this happened, you thought, okay, sales are going up, so let's buy some inventory. So you increased that a bit, and you increased your wages a bit, and payroll expenses were a little bit more than you had thought that they would be. You had some taxes and stuff that had to go out, and you had your you just looked, you went down through here, and things went up a little bit, and you were positive. You had estimated you'd spend 5,000 in advertising, but because you saw an uptick in sales, you thought, okay, let's keep this puppy rolling and let's kick it on up to 6,000. And that went along and that went along and that went along. And then, and you started out March with, let's get back up to what our starting position is. We started out March. We had estimated we'd have 5,800, but we actually ended up with 17,650. That's great, absolutely great. But March is when the COVID really started hitting us. March is when people started adjusting their orders. March is when people started being banned to the house. March is when kids were out of school and parents had to be home taking care of them. So let's look what happened in March. Our estimate of 70,000, actuality was 38,000. And our estimate of 20, our sales dropped to 15. Okay. Now we go on down here, and perhaps we didn't react fast enough on cutting back on our purchases, but in any event, we had estimated 30 and we ended up making inventory purchases of 28. We did go ahead and make some drops in our payroll. We pulled that down a bit. Consequently, some of our other expenses went down, and we really did try to adjusting, like supplies, but repairs and maintenance, we knew we had to go ahead and get some of those done, so we did. We pulled back on advertising, back a little bit on several others, but others remains the same. Okay, this is March. Now, we're going to start off the month of April, and our cash is much tighter in the month of April than it was in March. March at 17,650, 2350 in April. And it's going to hit us again. We had estimated 72,000 and they dropped to 18,000, our sales did. And our collections from credit was 5,000. So our cash in is going way, way down. And we're going to try to adjust, but are we going to adjust quickly enough? Our inventory, we adjusted our purchases down to 20,000 and we pulled our employees down to 17. And we tried to, we're in April, so we had those payroll taxes from January, February, and March. So we had that expenditure along with, again, here's where we tried to adjust. We pulled down our advertising. We pulled down on utilities because we weren't producing as much. Now, let's take ourselves back up to the beginning of May. And here's where we find ourselves at the beginning of the May. We're $33,000 in debt, actually. We had estimated we'd be in the positive by $27,800, and we are actually $33,000 in the red at the beginning of that month. Now, we all know that in April, we should have been looking at lines of credits and all that, but right now I'm just making a point with what actually can happen. Now, let's go over to a company that went through a prosperous time, a company that was making valves or making masks or making something that was in demand. Now, remember, January and February, exactly what we anticipated, exactly what they were for our first company. But here's where things change. In March, somebody found out that we could make something that supplied them. And our sales turned up a little bit because it's just starting to happen at this point. Well, we also knew we had orders coming in. So we adjusted our purchases to 40,000 when we had estimated we'd spend 30,000. And we saw we're going to need more people. So we had to go up, we had to employ more. And we had other expenditures that we went through that we adjusted. Well, since business is good and we found a new target market, let's go reach out to some other folks. And we go on through. Utilities are up because we're there more, we're manufacturing more, we're working more. But here's a real kicker. We found out in order to meet our production needs, we were going to have to buy a piece of equipment. We had estimated other expenses at 1,000, and it turns out we had to spend 10,000. Now, let's go back up to the beginning of May. Now, remember what our business was that had been through a very difficult period during the COVID? Look at this. Our business that's in a period of prosperity is almost in the very same position as our business that went through a bad scenario. This business is in a bad position because it's expanding at a rapid pace, and its cash flow has not allowed it to keep up with the expansion. So remember, 33,650 here, and for the company that had a bad situation, 33,900. So it's kind of a telling fact. Now, let's look at where you are right now. Kayla, would you like to get our PowerPoint back up? Are you sinking? After you have closely looked at your cash flow, you need to ask yourself, how would I classify the position of the business right now? Are you sinking, struggling, floating, or flying? And then ask yourself, is there anything I can do to place my business in a better position? And what is it that I can do? Okay, let's go through that a little set of questions. If you considered yourself sinking, ask yourself, what can you change? Now remember, in some cases, like in mine, when NAFTA passed, there was nothing I could do to change what the federal government had done. There was nothing I could do when materials were rotting on a dock in Los Angeles, and there was nothing I can do when a trade embargo had been placed on Pakistan. Have you talked to an outside advisor, and are you considering that? Because it's a very good thing to do, to look at it, have another person look at it from another perspective. You have looked at it until your head hurts. You have analyzed it so many ways, so many directions, but you need another person's viewpoint on it, because they may very well have new ideas. They may come up with possible options that had never even entered your mind. Do you foresee opportunities, and not just pie in the sky opportunities, but solid opportunities? Are you willing to invest more of your personal assets in this business? Do you need to take a loan? Are you willing to take a loan? Have you used the good old Ramsey approach and the common sense approach, basically? And that is, find ways to cut the fat, find ways to bring in cash, sell things, liquidate things that cannot bring in more cash, and you don't see any possibility that they will in the future, any near future. Now let's look at what if you classified yourself as struggling. First, ask yourself, were you struggling before, or is your situation solely due to COVID? Do you see any way to get back or to move forward? Is there any way to cut expenses, sell assets that don't bring in cash? Can you sell assets? I mean, is there a possibility that you have some things out there? Do you have a truck that's not being used too much? Do you have some equipment that you thought you'd bring it back in, but it's just been sitting there for about 2 years? Again, have you spoken to an outside advisor? You may want to call one of us with MEPOL. Call your banker or a CPA or the Small Business Development Center. Do you just need some direction and somebody to help you get to a direction that you hadn't considered at this point? If you classified yourself as floating, that might sound like you're just flitting through life, but I know of several companies, in particular some fabrication, CNC type, and there's a few guys that work there and they've worked together for years and they are very happy with floating. They are bringing in what they want. They have customers that are happy with them and that they supply well, and they've been pretty good with this. They're all prospering to a point to where they're happy. But what happened when somebody came to their door at COVID and said, I know that you have the equipment to build this for me. So was an opportunity placed on them, or was a threat placed on you on this floating business because of COVID? And if so, does this business need additional cash? Once again, I'd also suggest you talk to an advisor. Now, let's talk about if you're flying. That may just seem like the most fabulous position to be in, but as you saw from our cash flow a while ago, you can be in just as much trouble from flying as somebody was who was negatively impacted by COVID. Did COVID result in a new opportunity, and will it continue? There's a key. Will it continue? Did it help you? Have you discovered a totally new target market? You had one guy come to your door who needed something, but that opened up an entire arena of companies or an entire industry that you had never even considered pursuing business from before. Is this temporary and totally due to COVID? Will you need additional cash, new employees, new equipment, expanded facilities? Can you expand your credit with your suppliers? And again, this is another topic for another webinar because that can be very, very worthwhile looking into. Do you need to go to your banker and open or expand a line of credit? Do you need to expand a current line of credit? Do you need to open one? What do you need to do in that arena? Or do you need to buy some equipment and you're going to have to go take out a long-term loan? Can you afford to grow and expand too quickly? Remember back to our example. Even in this case, even if things seem great, if you've got orders stacking up on everybody's desk, if things just seem to be really moving forward, you still need to talk to an outside advisor, because if you're moving like that, your CPA or your banker or somebody with MEPOL or an SBDC or just a good friend may be able to look at that and help you understand. And you always ask yourself, what do I want and how will I manage it? Cash flow. Cash flow is always the key to planning and decisions in a crisis or any time. So let's take a final poll. Kayla, you want to pull up that final poll?
Okay, we have the poll launched. After having participated in this webinar, do you plan to take a closer look at your cash flows on a regular basis? And if you guys could go ahead and get your answers in. And I'm not getting any feedback on this one. You guys may be having some trouble voting on this. Let's see, might have a few. Yeah, I'm seeing that it's not showing. The survey is showing. Okay. All right, I got a few yeses out of the question box, so I apologize that didn't come up. I definitely got some yeses from you guys. So we were looking for that response. I'm going to go ahead and close it out. All right. Okay. Go ahead, Miriam.
Okay, we hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions or you have any comments, please feel free to contact your nearest Manufacturer Extension Partnership of Louisiana project manager. If you have questions regarding cash flow, please feel free to call me directly. My phone number is listed here, 318-348-1986, or feel free to send me an email and we'll just see if there's anything that we can just talk through that might help you. If you'd like copies of the spreadsheets that were used today, either the 12-month or the daily, weekly, expanded to a monthly one, please email me for that and I'll be glad to send those to you. Again, miriam.russell@meepo.org. We're going to open up for questions right now. If anybody has any questions that you would like to pose, please feel free to place those in the question box and we'll take it from there.
And just to let you guys know, the red arrow at the top corner of your screen, if you're not seeing where to ask the questions, just hover over it. It should say show control panel, and then you should be able to enter a question there. We do have a couple to start, Miriam, so I'll go ahead. In this period of uncertainty, would you still recommend projecting 12 months into the future, or just project 3 to 6 months as things are changing so rapidly?
What I would do is I would go ahead with my 12-month projection because I know that I've got those annual payments and I always need to be cognizant of when they fall, and I need to be at least 2 to 3 months ahead, if not further, in my planning process for those big hits like payroll taxes and things like that. But in that 12-month scenario, what I would do is I would go back and be constantly in a mode of adjusting everything that I had done 12 months into the future. On a monthly basis, I would be adjusting what I anticipate to happen next month, and possibly up to 2 to 3 months in advance, because again, you know it, I know it, nobody knows what's going to be happening. We don't know what any finalities are going to be or are down the road, but we've got to go ahead and do some anticipating because we've got to order inventory and we've got to make payments and we've got to adjust our payroll if necessary. So that is what I would do.
Okay. Let's see, the next question here. Since both the company that suffered during COVID and the company that had an increase in sales during COVID ended up in relatively the same cash position, what would you recommend for each?
Well, when they both started seeing a very drastic change in their sales, one went down, the other went up, but they were very drastic. And when things drastic happen, you need to start asking yourself, is this something that I can project forward? Is this going to continue? Are my sales going to continue to go up, or are they going to continue to take a dive? Do you anticipate once we get to somewhat normalcy that you'll be back generally at a position that you were previously? And you've got to make adjustments. And again, if that means going and talking to a banker, if that means sitting back and being very, very honest with yourself and saying, you know, this was hard before, but it's just about killed me now. What do I need to do? Do I need to shut it down? Do I need to cut back to half of what it was? Do I need to even look at the potential for bankruptcy? What do I need to do? Because you've got to be realistic, or otherwise, you've always heard the term throwing good money after bad. At some point, that's what it becomes. So that is what I would suggest.
Okay, the next question, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint or the spreadsheet? So I think you had said, Miriam, that if you just email Miriam at the email address on the screen or even call her, I'm sure she can give you a copy of the spreadsheet as well as the PowerPoint.
I'm glad to.
That's not a problem at all.
Okay.
And I have another question here for you, Miriam. Is there any way that we can see which industries are growing or declining?
You know, there are forecasts out there right now, and I've been trying to watch them, and some are obvious and others are not. Um, Let me see if I can find a definitive answer to that. And please feel free to email me. And if I can find that definitive answer, I will. Again, you know, most of these forecasters, they do their planning a year in advance, and they thought they were all settled in and had 2020 under control. But so far, nothing has been status quo. Nothing has been what they always base a forecast on, and that is historical data and trends, because the trends have thrown them just literally up in the air, and historical data had no application for the most part. You know generally what your seasons are, but as you can see, we don't know what's going to happen with that Christmas decoration guy. So please just send me a question and I will do some research and see if I can find some good or a reliable, what we would consider a reliable source for projections. Be glad to try and help any way we could.
Okay, and I got a mini thanks back, so you should receive an email, Miriam.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. I do want to let the audience know that you should receive a survey from us after the webinar ends. We would appreciate if you would fill that out. It would help us tremendously. Again, if you have any questions for us, feel free to email Miriam or anyone on the MEPAL team. All of our email addresses, contact information is at our website, www.mepal.org. Also, be on the lookout for our webinars. We plan to have one monthly to start off, and we plan to keep them around the 15th. So you should see something else coming up from us very soon. Thank you all.